Welcome everyone. My name is Devadas. I'm the CEO of the Future Moves Group. As I announced on the 2nd of June, we're going to be doing a series of 7 parts on Singapore and how it handles economic crisis. And this is part 1, which is called the backstory. Now, if we go back in time and look at Singapore's economic performance in the 1980s and 1990s, all the way to the early 2000s to 2015, you'll realize that we've had recessions before. In fact, we had 4 recessions, but they all had the same characteristic. They were relatively unexpected, they were very sharp, they were also very short, and the recovery was V-shaped. If you look at the performance over the last 10 years, what you will see is essentially that Singapore's GDP performance has been a secular and steep decline. And that has significant consequences when we compare it against how we went into recessions in the 1980s and 1990s, where we went in with a strong GDP starting point, going into the COVID-driven economic crisis where going in from a very weak starting point with a history of weak momentum behind it. And that has long-term consequences, not only for our recovery, but how it's going to manifest itself. In the last 5 years, especially in the last 2 years, you see that we had a very steep, essentially cliff fall in GDP performance between 2018 and 2019. So the COVID crisis, bad as it is, unexpected as it is, was actually something that presaged what was already potentially going to happen to us, which was that we were going to enter into a recession, albeit a mild one. In fact, we barely escaped a technical recession in 2018. What the COVID crisis has done, it completely magnified the effects of that, and we can talk about that in future videos. Now, we ended 2019, this chart ends in July, which showed that we were looking at 0.1%. We actually ended up in 0.7% GDP growth. Now, what I want to do is contrast that 0.7% GDP growth, which the government actually took a essentially celebratory stance on because they were expecting to go into a recession, and compare that to the performance in the 1980s and 1990s, where essentially we had growth in the high single and for several years in the low double digits, 10, 11, 12%, and in the 1990s, in some years approaching 13 and 14%. We have not seen those kind of numbers for over 2 decades. In the last 10 years, we've averaged essentially between 2 and 4% growth, and that was considered successful. So it's a new definition of success where growth numbers are low, but as long as we can achieve them on a reasonable, sustainable basis, we consider ourselves to be doing well. And there are several reasons why. One is potentially that we are now an advanced economy, and advanced economies have slower rates of growth. The second is that we're moving and still transitioning and restructuring, and so there's a lot of frictional costs. Now, these can be viewed as explanations, they can be viewed as excuses, they can be viewed as complete bullshit. We don't actually know. What we do know is the fact that having a weak historical longitudinal momentum of growth and a weak starting point of growth as we enter the COVID crisis will have enormous significance in how we handle the crisis and also how we emerge out of the crisis. Now, the big question is, how's that recovery going to look like? It could be a V-shaped recovery as we used to enjoy in the 1980s and 1990s. It could be a kind of a U-shaped recovery that we sort of had in 2009. It could be an L-shaped economic pattern, which isn't really a recovery. It's sort of like a stabilization at a very low level. It could be a sine curve type recovery where we go down, we bounce up very quickly, and then we sort of level off. And this is sort of what 2009, 2010, 2011 seemed to look like at that time. Or we could be in a highly volatile long-term space where we have improved performance, improving performance, improving performance, improving performance. We don't know, but we'll come back to this in part 7 and we spend more time talking about that. So that brings me to the end of part one. In part two, I'm going to be talking about the game plan that Singapore has adopted to deal with the crisis, at least in the 2020 to early 2021 scenario. So hopefully we'll tune in at that same time, same channel uh, on the 4th of June at 9 a.m. See you then. Thank you for watching, and I hope you took away something that's going to be helpful to you.